Pre-election controversy in the United States. Donald Trump repeats the threat that he might not accept the result if he loses in less than 6 weeks' time. Can he carry out his threat? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Imran Khan. The US presidential election in November is happening against a backdrop of a global pandemic, recession, nationwide protests against racism, police brutality and inequality. But it could take the United States into uncharted territory if Donald Trump refuses to concede. The president's refusal to commit to a peaceful transition of power if he loses is kicking up yet another controversy. Trump has repeatedly said he won't concede since he began trailing his rival Joe Biden in opinion polls. Democrats condemn his threat and senior Republicans are distancing themselves. But Trump's doubling down and again questioning the fairness of postal voting. Our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett begins our coverage.
Many Americans in the United States were alarmed this week when the U.S. president once again suggested that he may not accept the results of the 2020 presidential election, particularly if the results are legally ambiguous in favor of his rival Joe Biden.
We're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transfer of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it, and you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. Go ahead.
Now, the fear of many voters is that the U.S. president could use uncertainty surrounding the election result to hold on to power. Now, both Republicans and Democrats are amassing legal teams preparing for that possibility, even if it is particularly targeted to battleground states. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton has reflected the view of many in her party, the 2016 presidential nominee for the Democratic Party, suggesting that the 2020 nominee, Joe Biden, should concede under no circumstances as long as the results are unclear and there is the chance for a legal challenge. So, given this uncertainty, it is clear that both sides are keeping their options open. But according to an article in the Atlantic magazine, what gives Republicans an edge, perhaps, is the expiration of a legal ruling that has really opened the door to allowing an army of conservative volunteers to essentially police through a variety of means the balloting that is taking place in contested states. Now, the accusations from the left is that this is outright voter suppression and even fraud. The tactics have already been employed to some extent, for example, requiring ID to cast a ballot, outlawing ballots that arrive late. As a result, there is concern that we could see a long, drawn-out conclusion to this U.S. election in 2020, much as we saw in 2000 when the results were not decided until mid-December. And even worse, there is fear that the results could be so unclear that one side, particularly the loser, would refuse to concede.
Let's bring in our guests who are all in the United States. From Austin, Texas, Matthew Mackowiak, founder and chairman of the Republican Communications and Political Consultants, the Potomac Strategy Group. And from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Claire Finkelstein, professor of law and faculty director at the Center for Ethics and Rule of Law at the University of Pennsylvania. And from Bethesda, Maryland, is Alan Lichtman, presidential historian and distinguished professor of history at American University. Thank you for joining us all. I'd like to begin in Austin with you, Matthew. Every 4 years, quite proudly, the American people go and peacefully overthrow the government of the time. It's been going on for 45 times now. This time, there seems to be some controversy. This president is saying that he's not going to guarantee a peaceful transition of power. What on earth is the justification for that?
Yeah, this is a constant challenge for President Trump, and that is from time to time he doesn't speak as literally as I think the press and perhaps the public takes him to be doing. In this case, it would have been far better had he said, "Yes, there will be a peaceful transfer of power. There may be legal challenges on one side or the other. That's entirely appropriate." But when people hear the phrase "peaceful transfer of power," they think of the military being used to keep a dictator in power. That's obviously not going to happen in the United States. We may have legal challenges that may last weeks or even months potentially. It's going to be a disruptive period for the country. But I have zero doubt that the courts and the military will be used the way they always have, and that in the end, we will have the duly elected president sworn in on January 20th.
But why the fiery language, Matthew? Why not even just once, where his advisors could probably say you might want to tamper down the rhetoric, twice, three times? It keeps saying it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Trump's used any. I don't think he's really used the fiery language. He was asked about the phrase peaceful transfer of power. He's never said there won't be one. He was asked about it. Look, he wants to remain, he wants to protect his ability to sue in states if he believes the election laws have been violated. That's entirely appropriate. I'm not even sure I see much of a distinction between the way the Biden campaign is protecting their options and the way the Trump campaign is protecting theirs.
Claire Finkelstein in Philadelphia. What are your thoughts? I mean, our guest in Austin, Texas, is saying that actually everything is normal and this is just part and parcel of the rough and tumble of politics.
I wish I had as much faith in the willingness of Donald Trump to abide by the rule of law as our guest does. He has signaled repeatedly that he will only follow prescribed pathways, legal pathways, if he wins. He has made remarks that suggest that, in fact, he will use every means at his disposal to ensure that he remains in power. And this is gravely concerning. This kind of messaging sends a signal to his base. He's been sending signals repeatedly that he believes the Democrats are trying to steal the election. In fact, the reverse seems to be quite true. He often accuses the other side of doing exactly what he himself is in the process of doing. But by using this kind of rhetoric, what he's doing is creating a platform for messaging his supporters on the evening of November 3rd that he thinks the election is being stolen. And that may create an atmosphere of chaos. It may produce violence in the streets. And it may be that in the ensuing chaos, and this is really the point of the article in The Atlantic that was pointed out, he may have an easier time influencing, for example, the assignment of electors with the states, because unlike in 2016, he is now president, and therefore he controls a great deal of what the federal government can do in intersecting with state election officials to try to tilt the election in his way. There may eventually be court battles. I agree with Matthew that the most likely scenario is that the courts will function the way they always have, and I do believe the military will. But as we know from 2000, that can be an extremely disruptive process for the country, creating a lot of uncertainty and a lack of faith in the outcome of the election.
Let me go now to Bethesda in Maryland and Alan Lichtman. Is there any precedent in US history that we can look at and we can suggest is the model for moving forward? Or is this the first time this kind of language has been used?
Oh, no. We have certainly precedents here, but I want to make one quick point. The danger is not here that once the Electoral College ballots are counted, that Donald Trump will barricade himself in the White House and call on the Proud Boys to keep him in office. No, the real issue is, and the president has made this absolutely plain, that he will do everything possible to steal the election before that happens by suppressing the vote of the rising Democratic base of minorities and young people. He's absolutely brazen about that, and we've had that happen before. 2000, the election came down to Florida. Bush won Florida by 537 votes and won the presidency, but the wrong person was selected. In fact, as I proved in my 2001 report to the distinguished United States Commission on Civil Rights, as a result of the discarding of votes cast by African Americans, Al Gore should have won Florida going away. Walter Maybain, a distinguished political scientist, did a careful study following up on mine and found that Gore should have won that election by more than 30,000 votes. You can also go all the way back to 1876 in the transition from Reconstruction to white supremacy in the South, when there were disputed ballots from South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida. It always seems to come down to Florida. And the truth is, the Constitution says nothing about how to deal with that. And Congress set up a commission which was supposed to be evenly balanced between Democrat, Republicans, and independents, turned out to be 8-7 Republican, which made every decision 8-7 in favor of the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes. And there was talk about violence, about not accepting that result, about a new civil war. It didn't happen. We did have a peaceful transfer of power.
Matthew, we're talking about voter suppression here, quite a serious allegation. The reason that President Donald Trump is so confident that he might be in the White House come November is because he's already rigging the election. That seems to be an accusation coming out. What do you think?
I think it's pretty hard to argue at this point that either side is quote unquote rigging the election. I do think there are legitimate concerns about states that are mailing out ballots that people haven't requested to receive by mail. I don't believe there are any real legitimate criticisms about absentee voting, where someone requests a mail ballot, they receive it, and then they return it. But there are a handful of states that are doing unrequested universal mail ballots. And the problem with that is that the data that counties and states have is not going to be perfect. They're going to be mailing ballots to people who are not currently living at the place where they're sending the ballots. And that is going to create confusion. And then there's also questions about ballot harvesting, about people going out and literally picking up ballots and bringing them in. There are questions about whether ballots have to be postmarked and by when they have to be postmarked or when they have to be received. I think I heard yesterday in Pennsylvania, they're going to accept mail ballots for 6 days after the election, and the ballots do not have to be postmarked.
Matthew, are you saying the U.S. election system, isn't fit for purpose?
Well, I think there are legitimate questions about it, and that's why there are something like 3 or 4 dozen major lawsuits in different states, because a handful of states, I think, have gone beyond what is a reasonable system. That said, I do not believe right now that most Americans should look at this and have doubt about the integrity of the result.
Well, let me bring in Claire Finkelstein here to respond to you. Alan, I'll come to you in just a second. I want to bring Claire in here. Claire, what do you think of what Matthew is saying? He's saying that actually the problem isn't rigging votes, the problem isn't voter suppression, it's actually just the system.
I think what Matthew is saying is irresponsible. We have no evidence that there is widespread fraud or any risk of fraud or insecurity in the use of mail-in balloting. Washington State has used mail-in balloting extensively for many, many years. We have just about 0 reports of problems with mail-in balloting. And to suggest in the middle of a pandemic, when people are afraid to go to the polls, that there is a national security problem with the use of mail-in balloting is an attempt by the Republicans, and part of their talking points, to suppress the votes, because they know that mail-in ballots will most likely be used in heavily Democratic areas, as well as the fact that voter suppression will work to the benefit of Republicans because Democrats tend to win the popular vote. Donald Trump's best hope for winning the election legitimately is through the Electoral College. He is very unlikely to win the popular vote. And so putting it about that mail-in balloting in the middle of a pandemic runs a risk of fraud and is dangerous, I think, is an attempt at manipulation, and it should not be allowed. There should be great confidence in the use of mail-in balloting, except for the fact that Donald Trump has been presumably working with Louis DeJoy, the Postmaster General, to suppress votes by interfering with the delivery of postal mail. And that is a transparent attempt to interfere with the operation of mail-in balloting and absentee balloting, something that is extremely problematic. And fortunately, the House of Representatives has been looking into the functioning of the post office, and I hope we'll be able to address this prior to the election.
Alan Lichtman, let's have your response to what Matthew said.
Yeah, what Matthew says is typical of what we heard from the president, these unsubstantiated generalizations. Let me give you the facts. About 5 states have been using this universal mail-in ballot system that Matthew decries for many, many years. That includes the blood red state, Republican state of Utah. There has been essentially zero problems with voter fraud or with any kind of mismanagement of the system. The system has worked very well, and in fact, it's a very good system because it promotes increased voter turnout, which is something that the Republicans have made clear they don't want. The Republican base, is the most shrinking part of the electorate. It's old white guys like me. In addition, there have been a number of studies by Republican-oriented groups, including the National Republican Lawyers Association, the highly conservative Heritage Foundation, and the president's own commission on election integrity, and they have found virtually zero fraud in mail-in ballots, whether it's regular absentee or universal mail-in like we have in Utah or Oregon and Washington. So when you get past the rhetoric and look at the facts, you see, as the professor correctly points out, this is a transparent attempt to suppress the vote. It has zero to do with voter fraud. We've even seen, William Barr and Donald Trump, going after these 9 ballots that were inadvertently discarded, had nothing to do with fraud, as example of, this massive Democratic fraud effort. And in fact, it was done in Luzerne County, a Republican-controlled county in Pennsylvania. It had nothing to do with Democrats or fraud. It is just so irresponsible what the Republicans are doing here. And it plays right into the hands of Vladimir Putin, who likes nothing more than casting doubt on our democracy, causing division and chaos in America.
Matthew, what's your response to that? You've had 2 people there very, very, very critical of your position, your president's position.
Yeah, I mean, that was 4 minutes of demagoguery that I'll never get back. They entirely ignored the points I was making. Okay, I'm not saying that absentee balloting, which is entirely appropriate, there's no problem with absentee balloting. In the states that have universal mail balloting, they've been doing that for years and years and years. And they have very good systems.
And they had no problem their first year when they did it, Matt. Come on. Their first year, they had no problem.
So, Alan, you think 40 states that don't have mail balloting in a matter of weeks can clean up their data enough and deliver mail ballots to people who didn't request them in a way that would maintain the integrity of the election? You have confidence in that?
Absolutely, and it's not 40 states that are doing that, Matt. Come on. Get your facts straight if you're going to make claims.
You are correct. You are correct. I think I want to say it's around 10 states that are doing universal mail ballots. So all I'm doing is separating.
Thank you. It's nice to get the facts straight, Matt.
All I'm doing is separating universal mail ballots from absentee. Those are different things. I do not want to suppress anyone's
no fraud.
Claire, let me bring you in here. I mean, at what point do you have to say that the election system, the election process, is at breaking point here? Because if the president is saying that it's not fit for purpose, it's not going to work, there will be problems come election day. And on the other hand, you're hearing, well, actually, no, the system does work. It's voter suppression that's a problem. At what point is the actual US election process the problem?
There are deep problems with our voting system in this country, but it does not have to do with mail-in ballots particularly. And by the way, on that topic, I'd like to say that if the Republicans are so concerned about fraud and the use of mail-in ballots, then why did the president suggest that to his base that, in fact, people should vote twice, once by mail-in and the other in person? As far as our system of voting, when is it truly broken? The biggest problem that we've had in recent years with the fairness and equality and the legitimacy of our voting system is, number one, the fact that a very small segment of the population votes. We need to make it easier for people to register to vote, and then we need to make it easier for them to vote. That's number one. Number two, gerrymandering. We've seen years and years of gerrymandering and the ability to control the way that the votes come out in a way that is not reflective of the underlying will of the people. And those battles around gerrymandering have also, in effect, been an effort at voter suppression and to control the outcome. The Republicans do not want a large segment of the population to vote, and they do not want their votes to be equally counted. And our politics will look very, very different once there are laws in place and practices in place, both at the national and state level, to address the disenfranchisement of large segments of the population.
Actually, Claire, I want to push you on that, because that's an interesting point. You're talking about the legality of all of this. Nothing that the US President Donald Trump has said or done has actually broken any laws, has he?
Well, actually, I think that's not true. I think what's going on in the post office at that point constitutes a deep legal problem. Because if indeed what is happening is that mail is being slowed, the operations of the post office are being gummed up and mail is being delayed. In some cases, we have reports of mail actually being dumped. And that all of this is being done to support the reelection chances of Donald Trump. There are deep legal problems with that, deep ethical problems with that. And so I think that, in fact, there are many respects in which the president's attempt to ensure his reelection and what he's doing to suppress.
Claire, we are running out of time, and I do want to come to Matthew.
Out.
Let's just respond to those allegations that illegality is happening. Now, it might not come out before the election, but certainly an investigation will take place after the election. If it does come out, your man is certainly impeached, isn't he?
No, there's not illegality at the post office. In fact, almost every allegation that's been made has been disproven or has been shown to have started in the Obama administration, including making the location and the number of mailboxes that are used more efficient, having a more efficient system. The post office has been losing tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars year after year after year. You're probably going to have, let's say 150 to 180 million votes cast. If half of those votes are cast by mail, that would be 75 million pieces of mail around the country. You're going to have, the post office handles something like 300 million pieces of mail in an average month. Okay, so it's a rounding error. It's not a significant part of their work. That to me is just not a serious argument to be made. The concern that I do have, that I think is very possible, is that Trump will win on election night and lose a week or 2 weeks later when all the mail ballots are counted. And that may be entirely legitimate. It may also be illegitimate. Either way, I think half of the country is going to see the ultimate result of the presidential election as illegitimate. And I think we are in for a very disruptive 2 or 3 month period, and I'm deeply concerned about that.
Matthew, I just want to get a response to you from Alan Lichtman. Alan, what's your thoughts?
Look, the 2000 election was not resolved. I think it was around December 12th, more than 5 weeks after the election. Did I hear one peep of a complaint from any Republican? Of course not. There is no requirement that the election be decided on November 3rd, particularly in the midst of a pandemic when you're having so many mail-in ballots. And Matt suggested, well, maybe that would be illegitimate to have a result after counting all the mail-in ballots. Of course, that's not illegitimate. A mail-in ballot is equal to any other ballot, and the election isn't decided until all ballots are counted, including all of the mail-in ballots. So I do not see an issue there. And yet, Matt is not inflammatory, I have to say. He's pretty calm, like the president. But, the last thing we need is even calm and rational people like Matt saying, well, the result may be illegitimate if it, takes a while to count the ballots. Of course not. That is not the case. Every ballot should be counted, and we don't have a result until all the ballots are in, and that's fine. As I said, Republicans were perfectly happy to have the Supreme Court give them the election in 2000 after almost 6 weeks.
Alan Lichtman, thank you very much. And I want to thank all of the guests, actually, Matthew Mackowiak, Claire Finkelstein, and you, Alan Lichtman, as well. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.